a talk where I was turn on all your devices. Yes. The goal was to make them all ring back then. So, okay. I'll wait until we're right on time. Okay, so hi everybody. How y'all doing today? Good? End of Mac Admins. Boo, yeah, right? No one wants the end of this. This has been a great event. My first time here, really enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for making me feel so welcome. A little bit about me. My name is John Britton. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Workbrew. My background is as a software engineer, mostly doing web development, and developer evangelist, and basically developer educator. I've spent a lot of time helping people learn how to do different development tasks to help them get ahead with with whatever they're trying to achieve. Workbrew, my company, is a software delivery platform. So we're going to go into the details today about all kinds of architecture, how things work, and also just kind of a high-level overview of the different ways that you could use Workbrew. So the agenda. First, what is Workbrew? Then we'll talk about architecture. I'll walk you through a deployment, how you can deploy Workbrew to your fleet. We'll talk through a few different endpoint permission models, ways that you can set up access on your endpoints with Brew, depending on your organization's preferences. MDM integration, how it works with your existing MDM tool, observability, configuration, remote management, and then we'll go through some vulnerability remediation, how you can find vulnerabilities and fix them, and then we'll have time for Q&A. I'd also just like to add that throughout the conversation, please feel free at the end of each of these sections to ask questions if you have them, rather than saving them all up to the end. There's no need to save them to the end. So, what is Workbrew? Workbrew is an enterprise software delivery platform. What does that mean? Well, it helps you get software onto your devices. That's the bottom line of the story. Now, for an IT team, this is process improvement, helping you save time, reducing your workload, generally making things easier for you. For a security team, it's about mitigating risks, staying compliant, enforcing your policies, and making sure that you're auditable. Engineers, when they think about Brew, they think about just being productive. They want to get their work done. They know how to use their tools. They want to get the tools that they're used to. But, especially in regulated companies, they need to be secure and compliant. So our goal is to take all three of these audiences and lift the experience for all of them, right? So make it easier for IT, make things more secure, and keep engineers productive. It's a way to provide managed Brew access. So Brew, if you're not familiar, I would expect that most people here are, but Brew is an open source package manager for Mac. It's the most popular package manager on the Mac. It has over 30 million devices with installs. Many engineers are already using Brew in your teams, and it may be unsupported or out of policy usage. Oftentimes, I use this description of you get an MDM to kind of lock things down and make things standardized, and then your engineers are coming in and getting angry because you took away their privileges, you took away their permissions, and they can't use Brew, so you have to give them back admin privileges, give them back Brew access, and now you have this kind of backdoor situation where you don't know what's going on, you have shadow IT, no visibility into what's actually happening. And so what we need is a way to give users access to Brew, give them the ability to self-serve, install other dependencies, without sacrificing on security and compliance. But there's another way to look at Workbrew. It's not about Brew, the package manager. It's about a centrally managed library of software for your whole fleet. While some of your team, the engineers mostly, will be familiar with Brew, not everybody is. I've talked to a lot of different companies, and I hear stories all the time of our customer service organization needs Python, or this team needs a specific application to do their job, and it's not packaged by my MDM. Right? Many MDMs have some kind of default packages, several dozen, and that gets you by. But if it's outside of those several dozen, you're in a situation where you have to package things yourself and keep those packages up to date. I heard about one team that basically disallowed Brew at their company and went and repackaged every single thing that their team uses via their MDM. And they basically have an entire team dedicated to packaging at their company. With Homebrew, the community packages over 13,000 official packages in the core and cask libraries. They're generally kept up to date very quickly. New packages come available all the time. and they're well maintained. So this is a great opportunity for you to say, stop packaging your own software and just use Brew. Up until today, it's been difficult to use Brew in kind of an enterprise fleet setting because there's no central management. So with Workbrew, we're aiming to alleviate that so that you can go and install whatever package from Brew you want remotely on all of your devices. So let's talk about the architecture of Workbrew, or how Workbrew works. There are 4 main components. There's Homebrew, the open source package manager. We have an installer, an agent, and a console. And so I'll go through each of them individually. Homebrew is the open source package manager that we talked about. This is just a screenshot from my machine. If I do which brew, you'll find that it's not the typical brew binary that you would expect. This is actually a wrapper around Brew that we built, and it allows us to basically parse every command that the end user is doing on the machine and look at it to make sure it's in policy, and then pass it on to the open source Brew. So under the hood of Workbrew is the same Brew everybody knows and loves, but with a little bit of extra kind of management features on top. When you do Brew version, you can see what version of Workbrew you're on and exactly what version of Homebrew you're on underneath that. So in every case where you've installed Workbrew, at the very bottom of the whole kind of system is Homebrew. Next is the installer. So Workbrew ships with a PKG installer. You can take this and drop it into your MDM tool and easily deploy it to your entire fleet. You can also just run it on the desktop. Just take the PKG, double-click it, run it, and install it, and that's fine as well. The installer installs not just Homebrew, but it also installs all of the Workbrew additional features. The agent, the connection to the console, to your workspace. It does everything for you automatically. There are a couple of prerequisites that I'll talk about, but we can help you automate doing that as well. Then there's the agent. So Workbrew ships with an agent, which is a launch daemon. It runs in the background on your Mac on a regular schedule. What it does is it checks in with Brew, the command line, the open source project, figures out what things are installed, what versions are installed, gets some metadata, and sends that up to our console on a regular basis. The agent also serves as a conduit for the console to remotely manage the machine. So if you send a command from the console to say brew install wget or brew install Chrome or brew install 1Password, whatever application you want to install, this is how it will go through. It'll go through the agent and then down to brew at the bottom of the stack. What's interesting about this is that if you have a multi-user situation, which I know a lot of folks here are in universities and they have more than one user on a single Mac, I've heard over and over again that Brew is difficult to use in a multi-user situation. What's nice about this architecture is that all code paths are effectively the same. The local user, when they use our wrapper, it goes through the agent. The agent parses things, applies the policies, and then passes it on to Brew. The remote user of the console, the IT admin, does exactly the same thing. And what this means is that if you have multiple user accounts on the device, it follows exactly the same code path as well. So there's really no problem with having multiple users. And then lastly is the console. So this is just a screenshot of the dashboard of the Workbrew console. It gives you an overview of your entire fleet, packages that are installed, devices, what commands have been run, where were their failures, what's up to date, what's out of date, things like that. So next, let's talk about deploying Workbrew. How do you deploy Workbrew? If you wanted to do this today, what would you have to do? The prerequisites are that you have a Workbrew installer, which you get just by signing up on our website. Your machine needs to have the Xcode command line tools, and you need to have the Workbrew agent API key. Those are the only prerequisites. What you do is you go into your MDM, and I'm assuming that you're going to be installing this via MDM. So you go into your MDM, you load up the PKG file, and you create a pre-install script. In that pre-install script, you write a file to disk. That file contains the API key that joins them to your workspace. And in that pre-install script, you can also install the Xcode command line tools. So we don't bundle the Xcode command line tools. You have to install that for yourself, but it's pretty easy to do that. Once you've done that, you deploy it via your MDM, and it will install on all your devices. Once it's installed, because we've set the console join API key, the devices just automatically show up in the console. There's no user accounts on the end user devices. They don't have to do anything. It also still appears on the device as Brew, and so the end user has nothing new to learn. It just works exactly how they've always used Brew before. A couple of questions that I get very frequently when we talk about deploying Workbrew and how things go after deployment is, can I install Workbrew on a device that already has Homebrew? What happens? And the answer is yes. The way that it works is Workbrew will just upgrade you effectively to Workbrew. It'll add the additional layers on top. It'll leave all the existing packages in place, and it will just work as you'd expect. And then the other inevitable question that I get is, what if something goes wrong and I want to uninstall it, right? We ship an uninstaller with the package, so it's really easy. Just run the uninstaller, and then you're back to Brew, back to plain Homebrew. So now, you've got this installed on your device. You've got it installed across your fleet. How do we actually manage Brew? What's the story on the device? Well, we have 3 different endpoint permission models. What is the story on the device for the end user, and what can and can't they do with Brew? We don't think one size fits all is the right answer. I hear over and over from highly regulated companies that they need to pre-approve every single package before it goes out into production. We cannot ever let anything go out. And then we hear all the time from the smaller companies or companies that have a very high engineering lean that we trust our users, we want to let them do whatever they want, we just want to make sure there are guardrails in place so that something doesn't go drastically wrong. We don't tell you whether your user should be standard or admin or how you should manage that. We give you the choice. You can figure it out, you can decide what you want to do, and we can help you make it so. So we support 3 different permission models. The first is restricted. This is when you have end users with standard user accounts on your devices, and they have no access to Brew. So if you have standard users and you don't do anything, they will have no access to Brew. So Brew will be installed, you'll be able to remotely manage it, install packages, set configurations, do everything that you would expect, but the end user has 0 access to Brew. This is also a way to say we don't want them to use Brew at all. We don't want them to have Brew on the device, because if you install Workbrew this way and you make them restricted users, they will not be able to install Homebrew either. Now, this is really not the ideal case, but this is a case for maybe you have users who are not familiar with Brew, and you want to have a single solution for your entire fleet where you can send out applications and send out software. And Brew has this large library of 13,000 packages, so it's very convenient for you to just use that. So maybe some users in your fleet don't even know that Brew exists, but magically applications just appear on their machines the same way as they appear on engineering machines and anybody else's. The second model for permissions on the endpoint is managed. And this is when a standard user is a member of the Workbrew users group on the device. Then they have managed access to Brew. What this means is that when they go and they execute Brew, it will execute the Workbrew wrapper, the thing that our secure CLI, that basically enforces all your policies. It makes sure that the end user conforms to the security and compliance settings of your organization. What's nice about this is that the end user gets the exact same experience that they always have with Brew, and you can be assured that they're not able to work around or do something nefarious either on purpose or by mistake. So the way that this is managed is there's just a group on the device called Workbrew users. You add them to that group just via your command line, and they're up and running. And then the last model is guided access. So this is when we have admin users on the devices. This is my preference as an engineer. I like to be an admin on my device, and this is what a lot of companies still do. But what's nice about this is that with Workbrew, even if you're an admin, all of the policies will be enforced. They have the ability to work around them, but not without some sort of knowledge on the part of the IT department or on the part of the Workbrew admin. So for example, if you have a policy that says you're not allowed to install BitTorrent on the device, somebody who's an admin could still install BitTorrent. They'd be told they're not supposed to do it, they'd work around it, they'd do it, and then you would know about it. So this is, ultimately, you give them more freedom, and you have to pay a little more attention, but this is the way that that will work. So those are the 3 different permission models of Workbrew on the device. Up next is MDM integration. So we plan to support as many MDMs as we can for integration. The integration point is relatively small surface area. The main goal of our MDM integration is so that you don't have to manage separate lists of devices, separate inventory mappings, and things like that. So what we do is we connect to your MDM provider. We use the Workbrew agent to read from the device serial number, along with all its other metadata, and we map that to your MDM, and we use your MDM as the source of truth for inventory and who has which device, and we use that information in our UI so that you can find the device that belongs to the correct user or whatever it is that you're looking for. We're currently integrated with Jamf and Kanji. We're building integrations with Rippling and Fleet already, and relatively quickly we build more as we have customers that come on that have different MDMs. So don't let this be a blocker to say, oh, they don't support my MDM. We'll happily support your MDM. It's not a huge lift for us to add more. This is what it looks like when you have an MDM integration. So this is the device listing page. I've blacked out a bunch of information, but you can see on the particular device the reference to Kanji. So you can see the device in Kanji. You click that, it'll take you to the Kanji page for that device. And then the Kanji user has the name of the user from Kanji that owns the device with that serial number. So that's MDM integration with Workbrew. Up next, we have observability. The idea here is that we want to be able to know what's going on inside of our fleet so that we can make informed decisions about what to do. One of the biggest challenges I hear from people is, I have no idea what's going on these machines. I have no idea what people are doing with Brew. I just know they need it. I know they complain if they don't have it, but I have no idea what's happening. So in Workbrew, once you have your fleet set up, you'll get access to the console. The console has a dashboard with an overview of everything that's going on in your fleet. You can do things like get information on installed packages. Brew has two types of packages, Formula and Casks. Formula are source-based packages. Casks are binary-based packages. And what you'll see here is the high-level dashboard giving me, I know I didn't show everything that's on here, but just the first part of the list. Every package that's installed on my fleet and how many devices it's installed on. You can also get an overview of your devices. So which devices have Brew installed? These are all the devices with Brew installed. When did they last check in? How many packages are installed? What version of Homebrew are they on? You can get a high-level overview of that. Then, once you figure out which device you're working on, if you want to get a more detailed view of a particular device, you can get a look at every single package on that device, what version it's at, and what version is the latest in Homebrew. As a little aside, Homebrew version tracking is a little bit interesting. Brew is built on top of Git. The entire project is in a Git repository. All the formula are in a Git repository. And whenever a change is made, an update to a formulary package, that Git repository gets updated. If you check on your device if a package is up to date, the way that that check works is it looks at the local repository and sees if your version that's installed is equal to the same version or less than the same version of the latest version in your package library. There's a separate update mechanism where you pull down the latest version of Brew that gives you all the latest packages. So there's basically two steps to check if something's up to date from the local machine. You first need to update Brew, then you check and see if your packages are updated. In the Workbrew interface, we're always using the latest version from Homebrew in our checking. And so we can tell you, even if the user hasn't run a command on their device to update the Brew repository, we can tell you if they're up to date or not. So this is a big advantage over if you're using an MDM script to do this. If you say, I wrote an MDM script that looks at the device and checks if it's up to date, it might be checking if it's up to date relative to the repository on the machine, not what's on the public internet. It's easy to work around, you just have to do a little bit more work, but that's how we do that right now. Oh, you have a question over here. Yeah, we got to give you this because it's recorded. Here, I'll hand it to you. I don't want to hit your laptop.
I can't catch it. Can the user see the dashboard to be able to update the packages, or is it only for the admin side?
So you're asking about the console. Can the users see the console? No, the users cannot see the console. As of today, the console is only for admins. They can see on their device if they use Brew, everything that's installed that way. I have had some requests about self-service, so especially for the cases where the end user is not a Brew user, and we want to use this as our organization-wide way to deploy software. Wouldn't it be great if we could go to the list of packages, 13,000 Brew packages, pick out the 100 we love, put them on a page, and let users go and click self-service to install those. Very easily done. We've not built that, but I could see if that was something that was of interest to someone, I could see us thinking about ways to do that or make that easier. Whether it's an API that we give you and you could do it yourself, or we build some kind of interface around that. Does not exist today, but I've definitely heard demand for that. Yeah, great question. Oh, there's another question back here. Maybe we can, would somebody volunteer? That would be great. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned earlier that you'd have some visibility into people who try to bypass installers, and I don't see, where would I see that, and how would that show up?
The way that you would get visibility into somebody bypassing is by setting policies and then being able to see what's out of policy. So right now, the way, I'll get into it a little bit later about configuration and whatnot. Right now, there's no out of policy indicator, but because we have all of the data of what's going on in the machine and we know what the policy is, we can compare those easily and show you. But there's no, as of today, there's no policy interface right now. So I'll show you a little bit more in a little bit. Somebody back there had a question too.
To go back to the self-service thing, instead of creating your own, why not just integrate with the MDM self-service too and make it something that, because most MDMs will have a self-service on the Mac OS and have it there. The user's already used to it.
Potentially, we have had some customers that have built their own self-service into the MDM where they've basically repackaged Brew packages in the MDM. We have to balance the users of the engineers that are, they expect it to work the way that it works with Brew. So I think that there's some level. I mentioned this yesterday in the Homebrew talk, but there's this thing called Brew Bundle, where you can create declarative files of what you want installed on the device. I think something like that would be more in line with the expectations of the developers and the MDM users. But yeah, I see what you're saying. So anyways, going back here, so you can see on the device everything that's installed on that device, what version it is, if it's up to date or not, and then also you have a one-click upgrade. If you click that button, it will upgrade it on the device immediately. Another thing that you have observability into, and this one is huge for me, is taps. So in Homebrew, we have something called a tap, and a tap is a repository full of additional packages. The default tap for Homebrew is called Homebrew Core, and another official tap for Homebrew is called Homebrew Cask. Those two taps contain the majority of packages that everybody knows and is used to using with Homebrew. But anybody can create a tap. You can create a tap for your organization. You can create a tap that you make public to distribute your code or your applications to third parties. And then anybody who uses Brew can add those taps to their Brew and install things from those taps. Now that can be a little bit scary. Because that's just arbitrary third-party stuff. You never know what's in them. Nobody says that because you added a tap that anything in that tap has been verified. At least with the official taps, you know that the Homebrew maintainers have been managing that. You don't know who is managing third-party taps. So again, with Workbrew, you're able to see what are people doing. What third-party taps do we have? What packages are installed from those third-party taps? Is this a problem or not? You have to decide for yourself, but you have the information. So that's observability. Now you can see what's going on in your fleet. Up next is configuration. With Workbrew, you have the ability to set and enforce configuration for your entire fleet. Homebrew has close to 100 different configuration options, and they're controlled by environment variables. Within Workbrew, you can set those configuration options for the whole fleet globally. So here's what it looks like. You go in, you create a configuration, you set the name of the option, and then you set the value, and you save it. That will be synced out to your entire fleet. And in this case, what I've done is I've enabled Homebrew verify attestations. This is a really cool feature, and it's relatively new in Homebrew. There's a blog post up about it that the Homebrew team wrote, which is pretty interesting. You should check out. But what this does is it sets your Brew CLI to reject any packages that don't have signatures that are as expected. And those signatures that are as expected are really interesting because they're attestations by the build infrastructure that's used to build Homebrew packages. So there's a new feature with GitHub, which is GitHub attestations. And Homebrew, being an open source project on GitHub, uses GitHub Actions to build these packages that we all install when you do brew install. On the GitHub Actions infrastructure, effectively, every time a package is built, that package is signed by a key that's controlled not by the open source contributor submitting the patch or by the project, but by the infrastructure. And so what this means is that you can say reliably, this binary was built by GitHub Actions using this workflow and this source code, which helps with verifying, mitigating supply chain attacks. Okay? So this is just one thing you could turn on very easily across your entire fleet, and you've increased your resistance to supply chain issues. Let's talk about some other configuration options. There's one called Homebrew System env takes priority. By default, Homebrew is configured in the environment, so you set an environment variable. There's a new feature that we added that is the ability to set configuration files. So you have a system-wide configuration file, you have a user configuration file, and you have a project configuration file. It works a lot like git config does, if you ever used that before. One overrides the other as you get closer to the project. That doesn't make sense in a managed situation. You don't want the end user being able to override your configuration settings. So this is probably the most important one for Workbrew users, is to be able to say Homebrew System env takes priority. What this means is that if Workbrew sets a configuration environment, it will always take priority over anything that the user does. What's interesting about this is if somehow the user manages to get a second instance of Homebrew installed on their system, that second instance of Homebrew will also respect these. Right? Every instance of Homebrew on the machine will respect these settings. Another is Homebrew no auto update. You might think, why would I want no auto updates? Well, instead of doing Homebrew no auto update, or instead of doing Homebrew auto updates, where every whatever amount of time the updates run, you could turn it off, and you could set that up yourself and control it on a per machine basis in Workbrew. So these are some interesting configuration options around what is allowed into the system. So we already talked about what taps are. There's this idea that you could just go and add any tap that you want. There's a new configuration option in Homebrew called Homebrew allowed taps. If you set this configuration option, what you can do is you can effectively say only packages from core or cask are allowed, or core or cask or my internal tap, or only my internal tap. I have my own set of software that I've packaged myself, and I want to use the Brew infrastructure to do it. Only what's in this tap is allowed to be installed. We just talked about verify attestations, same kind of thing. And then Homebrew artifact domain. This is an interesting one that I get a lot of comments about. So what this does is it says when the endpoint tries to install a package and needs to download the binary or get the source, don't go to the public internet. Instead, go to this other domain. And it could be a local domain inside of your VPN. And what this means is that you're able to effectively put an air gap in between your end user and the public internet of packages. I wouldn't say that this is a recommended way to use this, but in some situations, there are like highly regulated companies that just have a requirement that says we must be air gapped. We must not be going out directly to the internet. It's not allowed. So what you do is you make an internal mirror of all the packages in Homebrew, and then you point all of your devices to that internal mirror. The last configuration option on here, no fallback, is just to say that if that internal mirror is down, don't go to the public internet by default. This next one is about limiting what can be installed. So we have 4 different types of forbidden objects. We have one for casks, formula, licenses, and taps. Essentially what these are a list of the packages or the licenses or the taps that are not allowed to be added. So you could say, for example, block the BitTorrent package, or block AGPL software. If your organization has a rule that you can't use AGPL software, you can block it that way. Now, what happens when one of your end users runs into a problem with this stuff? What's the end result? Well, you can set these configuration options: Homebrew forbidden owner and Homebrew forbidden owner contact. What this does is it configures the end user's experience, the message that they see when they're told that something is not permitted by the policy. So if I set the owner to John in IT, and my contact is like help@mycompany.com, now when the user sees that they're not allowed to install BitTorrent or install some package that's been disallowed, or use a license that's been disallowed, or add a new tap because you only have certain allowed taps, they'll get a message that says, contact John in IT, here's his email, he'll help you, right? So we want to make sure that the user has an escalation path to get through this. And this is especially in the kind of managed user experience. In the admin kind of guided user experience, there's possibilities that we can add in the future where people can just go around this. They can say, I want to ignore this, an audit log entry will be triggered, and I'll enter in a reason of why I ignored it, an alert will go to IT, and they'll be able to process it as an exception to their compliance standards. Up next is remote management. How do we actually manage the devices in the fleet from a standard kind of central place? So you can run any command, any brew command that you could run on a local machine from Workbrew. So kind of the way that we've built this now is kind of an API style. We started with, you can do anything that Brew can do. So the more you know about Brew, the more powerful Workbrew is. Over time, we're adding more and more features that are kind of more user-friendly, things like policies or default packages or automations, recurring commands, things that the way we think, not the way that it actually works under the hood. But right now, you're still able to do a lot of these things just by following the interface of Brew and using it on a fleet-wide scale. So here's an example. Like I mentioned before, we have cases where we hear that our customer success team needs Python installed or our developers need something. You can just go and create a command and say install Python and choose where you want to install it. There's a drop-down. By default, it will go to all devices. You can choose to install it to a specific device or all devices. And then it will run within a few minutes and be on those machines, and you can report on all of the success of that happening. Up next is vulnerabilities and remediation. So we need to know when there's a vulnerability, and we need to do something about it if there's a problem. So the first thing we need to do is we need to ingest CVEs. We need to know that there are problems. So here's an example of a CVE. This is one I reference a lot, the XZ vulnerability that happened a few months ago. That CVE gets filed. It goes into a bunch of databases. Then when we find out that that CVE has been issued, we look at your fleet and we say, across every device, is this package installed anywhere? And is it of a version that is vulnerable? And if so, you'll be given a one-click option to just upgrade. And this is kind of what it will look like. After you click the option, it'll say upgrade XZ, the vulnerable package. Choose which device you want to run it on. Obviously, you want to run it on all devices. I don't know why you wouldn't. And then you run the command. And then what happens is it fans out one run per device on every device in the fleet. You can see the success rate, like if it succeeded or not. And then you can also drill down into the logs and see what it's doing on each machine. So you can see it was on this version, it's now on that version, and it is installed. So that's the high-level overview of deploying Workbrew, getting it running on your machines, observability, running remote management, fixing vulnerabilities. I'm happy to go into more detail with questions on any of those features, on how anything works. But that's what I have for you for today, so thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead in the back. Can you pass the mic?
Thank you. What does the user experience look like? Do they get notified as you're pushing changes to their machine, initiating brew commands and patching, all that?
The end user does not see anything. So what will happen is if a package is installed, it will just be on their machine when it's completed. There's no user interface for the end user other than the Brew CLI.
Okay.
Yep. Question over here? Yeah.
I'm more curious about the like the policies and how dependencies work for that. Like
Yeah.
if you have a policy that say you can install Python and it's got 12 dependencies, but somehow 2 of them are blocked. Like,
Yep.
is the whole thing blocked at that point?
That's a great question. So everybody asks me, why don't you have an allow list? Everybody asks. This is the first question I get. It's like, we need an allow list. Why do you need an allow list? We talk and talk and talk about it, try to figure out what they're actually trying to achieve. The reason we don't have that is because of what you just mentioned. The dependency tree is complicated. if you say allow this package, what does that mean for the dependency tree? Do you have to first vet every package in the dependency tree, so dependencies and dependence of dependence and dependence of dependence all the way down? Or does it mean you just, when you allow it, you allow all the dependencies by default? Okay, great. You could have one of those two options. Neither one sounds very good to me, because if you're just allowing everything by default, then what's the point, right? And then the big question is, what happens when dependencies change? Because dependencies change all the time. Maybe a new dependency was added, a dependency was removed, version changed, you never know. So that's why the only thing that we have an allow list for in here is taps, because taps don't have dependencies. There's nothing with that. Now, to your question, what happens if something depends on something that's forbidden? Everything that depends on a forbidden package will be forbidden. That's the only way to do it. Yeah. So for example, if you want to forbid a very low-level library, it will have repercussions, because every time that you go to install a package that depends on it, it will check all the dependency tree against that.
So back to the user experience, what does that look like? Like, do they just get told no, or like
They will just get a message that says, sorry, this is outside of your policy. You can't do that. And they'll be told to contact for help. Which is why, for us, what we really recommend is not about blocking and locking things down. It's more about educating your users, helping them understand what's allowed, what's a good use case, and then when they're trying to do something that's out of policy, rather than just saying, no, you can't do that, it's more of, why do you need this? Can we make this approved for you? Like, how can we help you get what you need? And so the workflow, we're in private beta right now. So some of this stuff is like not entirely built, but like the user experience as it should be is when the user tries to do something that's out of policy, instead of saying no, it's, do you really need this? Why do you need it? And then that goes into a ticket, and then the team says, okay, we need to review these couple packages and add them to our approved stuff instead of rejecting them.
So you probably asked this next, or answered this in a roundabout way then. Is there anything in the console that says someone tried to install something that was denied by policy, or?
As of right now, no.
Okay.
But that's not to say it wouldn't be very easy to do. And really what we've looked at is like different workflows for different companies. So we have some companies that are like very heavily invested in Slack, right? And so a workflow that I've had people request is when somebody asks for a package that's not allowed, I want a message in Slack and I want to click an approve button and have it go, right? And I want it to enter a thing into our audit log and have a reason captured and things like that. So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Thanks. Who else has questions? Oh, go ahead. You have another one?
This one's kind of a meme at this point. Do you have webhooks?
No.
Okay.
The short answer is no. The long answer is we will. What do you want a webhook for? What webhooks do you want? Yeah.
My boss is getting Mostly we're trying to be more event driven. So like when something goes wrong, we want to fire an event off to a central system
Yep.
and then process those events.
Yep.
And we need webhooks to do that. We don't want to have to constantly query an API to get the changes. We
Yep.
want the system to tell us something happened.
Yeah. So this is a really great question. I get this question in a lot of different forms. It's like, how do I get the data that's in this out? Is there a CSV export? Is there an audit log? Is there an ability to stream events to some kind of a log tool? Is there a webhook, right? These are all flavors of the same question, which is like, how do I get the data out? Absolutely yes. We want to work with design partners, people who are using this in production, to build the best ways to do that. It's like, sure, we can add a webhook, it's no problem. Is a webhook the best solution, or is a log stream better for you, right? And we don't know what your tooling is and whatnot, but absolutely we're going to have those kinds of features. Yeah, and then over here was a question.
Earlier, you were talking about permissioning for users, and it looked like it was being controlled by the OS level user groups. Does your tool automatically make those adjustments, or does it's on us to go ahead and make those changes via MDM or other things?
So yes, it uses OS level permissions as a way to kind of switch between the three different permission models of restricted, managed, or guided. We don't do that automatically. It's relatively easy. It's just one command. So for example, in the MDM deploy step, we could run a command that would add the user to the group very easily. But we don't do it automatically for you because we don't know which option you want. So we'll basically depend on your deployment. But in our guides, when you set things up, we explain how you do it.
But through a package, that would be a global setting almost, unless you're generating separate packages for each, like engineering versus sales.
Right now, it is global, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right now it's global, but what you would have to do is take the PKG file in your MDM, and when you deploy it to each of your devices, you would choose groups in your MDM and say, I want these folks to be on restricted, and I want these folks to be on managed. And the ones with managed, you would add them to the Workbrew users group.
Last question. You said it's in currently a private beta. What's the roadmap look like? You might release it.
Yeah, so private beta right now, we're in production use with companies. I say private beta mostly because we haven't published our open sign up, but we're very willing and able to work with anybody who's interested. We're trying to choose customers right now that are willing and able to give feedback. The most important thing to us is building features in line with customer expectations, so we don't want to just guess about things. So there are a bunch of features people ask that are pretty obvious, but we haven't built them because no one in production is actually using that, so we want to build the thing that will match the use case better. In terms of timeline, I would say in the next couple of months we'll have a public beta, and by the end of the year I hope to be publicly generally available. And then what I would say about that also is that anybody who's here who wants private beta access, feel free to come up after the talk, and I'm happy to set you up with a trial, get you access to the tool right away, and hopefully get some feedback from you on how you like it. Does anybody else have questions? No? All right. Oh, there's one back there. Go ahead.
Yeah, it just occurred to me when you said that, the console, is that cloud-based, I assume, or do you have to set up a server somewhere?
That's a great question. Our console is cloud-based, so you don't have to run anything internally. In the event that you're in a highly regulated industry that absolutely cannot do cloud and needs to do self-hosted, we can do that. It's not our preferred way to work, but if you're a giant company that has restrictions, that's something that we know is kind of part of the system.
We have restrictions, not that one.
Good. Yeah, glad to hear it's not that one. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? Oh, up here. One more. We got a lot of them. Great.
Okay, so with all that being said, but I'm not necessarily in a highly regulated environment, but I do want to know, what level of compliance have you achieved? Your organization has achieved.
Perfect. So we are currently in auditing for SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. We are not certified as of yet, but I expect we will be relatively soon.
Okay.
So that's where we're at on that. Good question.
Compliance is fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's so much fun.
Going through PCI right now. Anyway,
Yeah.
anyone else?
All right. Well, thank you very much.